Welcome everyone to this webinar, COVID-19 Vulnerability and Inequality and Diversity, Part 2, Voices from the Sector on Implications of Vulnerability in COVID-19 and Returning to Dance. By the end of this webinar today, we will be hearing voices from the sector on the implications of vulnerability in COVID-19 and returning to dance. And at the end of the webinar, we'll have an open space discussion where you'll be able to interact with other attendees, ask questions, and discuss your thoughts. Just a reminder about the context of these webinars. We won't be discussing very much about government guidance at this point, but if we do talk about government guidance, please remember that guidance is devolved and it varies between England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Also, if you're planning dance activities, bear in mind that there may be local restrictions in place in your area or region. And keep in mind that anything that we say in this webinar may be superseded by local restriction guidance. Also bear in mind that government guidance will evolve with science. No one has all the answers, including us, and this webinar is very much about trying to share practice. Also remember to read the relevant guidance for your planned work and ensure that you understand which government guidance affects your work. If you're not sure, please seek guidance from us or from the government about which one you should be following. Today, if you haven't been to one of our webinars before, you'll be able to interact with other attendees and with the panelists in two ways. Firstly, you can use the chat box to engage with other attendees and share information. You can also use the Q&A box to ask questions, and you can upvote questions in the Q&A box so that they'll move nearer to the top of the list to be answered. Our panel today includes a range of excellent practitioners from across the dance sector, including Kimberly Harvey, Director of the Youth Dance Program at Canduco Dance Company, Ellie Douglas Allen, Senior Producer at Canduco Dance Company, Jennifer Jean Charles, Creative Director and Choreographer, Hannah Robertshaw, Programs Director at Yorkshire Dance, Mark Smith, Founder and Artistic Director of Deaf Men Dancing, Sophie Tickle, Lead Artist at Dance Syndrome, and myself, I will be chairing. My name is Erin Sanchez. I'm the Manager of Health, Wellbeing and Performance at One Dance UK. Just to give you a sense of who we are, One Dance UK is the sector support organisation for dance and also a membership organisation. We advocate for the needs of dance to politicians and policymakers, funders, education, and other bodies on matters concerning children and young people, diversity, health and well-being for dancers and the wider society, and for professionals, including freelancers. If you're not already a member of One Dance UK, then please join. Together, we're stronger. Also, these webinars are co-presented by the National Institute of Dance, Medicine and Science, whose mission it is to enhance dancers' health well-being, and performance. There are 6 partners within the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science. They include Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance, the University of Wolverhampton, the University of Birmingham, Birmingham Royal Ballet, the Royal Ballet, and of course, One Dance UK. So I'd like now to pass over to Kimberly Harvey and Ellie Douglas-Allen to be able to share their presentation on Canduco Dance Company. Thank you, Kimberly and Ellie.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Ellie Douglas-Allen from Canduco. Maybe if we could skip to the next slide, Erin, that would be great. And the next one. Yeah, so thank you very much to One Dance UK for inviting us to the webinar. Kimberly and I are currently in the throes of planning our return to dance and return to the studio. So this is a really well-timed session. I think it's important to say that we actually haven't done any activity in person yet. So what Kimberly and I will be sharing are our plans and our preparations, but they're not tried and tested. And so we're really keen to learn from others who are kind of already making activity in person. So I thought it might be useful to just say a little bit about Canduco and COVID, and here's a brief summary of where we've been since March. All our activity has been cancelled. We've sort of been in various stages of crisis management and basically hibernation for the last 6 months, trying to kind of stabilise and replan our future activity. But excitingly, we are looking to return to the studio for the professional company in September. Could we skip to the next slide, Erin? So in returning to the studio, like many others, we've been wading through the government guidelines and hearing of other people's best practice in the sector. But some key considerations for us have been around how we continue to utilise the social model of disability, not adding in more barriers to participate in dance and in the studio, recognising that many disabled people may be in clinically vulnerable groups, but not all of them are. And so it's really important not to make assumptions around people's health, whether they are clinically vulnerable or not. And our job is really to enable people to participate fully if they choose to, whilst trying to minimise as much risk as we can. Key to this process has been communication and consultation with the different communities that we work with, the professional company, staff, freelance artists and young people, which Kimberly will talk about in a moment. And these individual conversations or wider consultations have really informed the plans that we're making. And so some of the kind of practical considerations that it's informed have been around how we schedule the working day for the company to avoid peak travel times, seeing if we can look at Ubers and taxis as means of transport rather than public transport. We've had some interesting discussions and conversations around the use of masks in the studio. One of our new company members is deaf, so actually masks are detrimental to her access needs in the studio, so we won't be using masks. We're also considering how sign language interpreters access the studio space and impact on our fixed team arrangements. So those are just a few examples, but I suppose our main aim is to really communicate clearly with our different communities and to communicate our risk assessment so that individuals are able to choose what feels like an acceptable level of risk and make informed decisions about participation. And now over to Kimberly and the next slide, please.
Hello. So yes, I'm Kimberly, and I actually came on board in my role at Kanduka as director of the Youth Dance Programme in July. So it was during COVID times, which was an interesting time to start a new role. And my first job in this role was actually to reconnect with our young people, both actually our current youth company, and also it was important for me to connect with the alumni as well, to reconnect with them and to communicate. And this was, first and foremost, this was actually more of a social proposition. This was to find out how participants were, where they were at, and how their parents felt as well. And then the next question was, for me, was what do they need or want from the Kanduka Youth Programme? With the caveat of, particularly in these COVID-19 times. So then for me, there's the question of how does what the participants need and want and what we offer in the sector as Kanduka, how do those two things come together? So what becomes very clear when we talk to our young people is that that point of dancing connection as part of a young company is how important that is to them. So from my point of view, at least first and foremost, that's looking like an online offer. But what I've become aware of through various conversations is actually that each of these online platforms that we have at our disposal, or each of the possibilities for engagement, they have limitations in terms of inclusivity and accessibility. So I am now looking at the idea of a multi-pronged approach, which will look at various ways that we learn. So it may be video, it may be audio, it may be pre-recorded, it may be live, it may be text, it may be image. And how this combination can create a diverse program with a variety of access points. Later in the year, of course, there's the possibility for a blended offer if face-to-face and live teaching becomes an option. But again, we're really aware that for some young people, the real life option won't be right for them, and that could be for a whole manner of reasons. That could be because of their own shielding situation or their own health condition, but it could also be because of the situation they're living in or current situation they find themselves in. So as Ellie said, what's most important for us is that we have clear communication, and part of the support structure is that communication in those conversations, to enable individuals to make choice, independence and autonomy, and for our young people as much as possible, as well as for the freelancers that we employ. Because the Kanduka artists that teach the youth program are all freelancers. So there has to be the consideration for those artists about how they're moving between the groups and what they're happy to do. But also what I've been thinking about as well, and knowing our participants, or some of them, is the need for an awareness and sensitivity around the communication and how we talk about the guidelines from the government, because I'm really conscious that actually there is a need to be careful, because there is a danger of a sense of othering or demonizing touch, and that's the last thing we want to do. And also with an awareness of potentially how the last 5 months has been for everybody, and actually not wanting to exacerbate any existing concerns or anxieties. Also, for me, there's a huge consideration around the live setting about what the role of the teacher is. And actually, for me, a huge part of being a teacher is the ability to be responsive to the individuals and to the situation. And how does that sit for us in line with the government guidelines, and the possible unpredictability of a live setting? So how can we still be flexible and responsive to the needs in the room and to our young people? So the question for us is, what is best for our young people in relation to what Kanduka offer? Could we have the next slide, please, Erin? So that's the end of our kind of little snippet of presentation. But what we'd really encourage you to do is to, if you feel like contacting us or having a chat with us or connecting with us in some way, as Ellie said, we are really open to conversations and sharing thoughts and practice. So yeah, these are all the ways you can get in touch with us if you would like to. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, both Kimberly and Ellie. Thank you for the presentation, but as well, some really very insightful comments there. I particularly was interested in hearing Ellie talking about the sort of practicalities of the planning that they're having to do and how detailed that needed to be. And also the concept of participant need and want and trying to be responsive to those needs and wants. It was really fascinating. So thank you to you both. And we're now going to hand over to Jennifer Jean Charles, Creative Director and Choreographer.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Very glad to be here. Oh, I can see now. Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I do. I work as largely I have been working as a mass movement choreographer, which meant a lot of my work relied on groups getting together, largely community groups coming together for big outdoor arts festivals. So some of the festivals I was preparing to work on was Manchester Day, Brent 2020, and Milton Keynes International Festival. And as soon as March came along and COVID happened, all of these projects and others fell off the table. So yeah, a big blow, not only for me, but when I look back on my accounts and look back on, my activities, I realized that actually the last few years I've also been employing quite a lot of freelancers, and therefore not only was I losing work, but the team that I would have brought on board were losing work from me as well, and there was actually nothing I could do. So yeah, I just took a breath and thought, okay, it's happening to everyone. This might be an opportunity to reflect. This might be that wilderness moment I'm sometimes in as a freelancer, where you really don't know what's next, but somehow everyone's in that place rather than just me. And I just took a breath. I had a project which I was very excited about, Black Victorians. And before COVID, I was at the stage of negotiating phase 3 of a research and development program for this project, Black Victorians. Black Victorians is a dance theatre piece inspired by an exhibition which I came across at the Autograph Gallery in Hoxton. And it was the findings of hundreds of portraits of Black people during the Victorian era, something I didn't know about my history and was very excited about. So the 2 phases of R&D was very exciting, and the last performance and work in progress was actually performed inside Kensington Palace. And I just had big dreams about where this could go and how we can retell a very important part of history, which included Black people. But as I said, it all came to an end. I got a call from Historical Royal Palaces, who were funding the project, to say, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do. The money which we were using to make this happen was through tourism, and tourism has come to a halt. So I thought, fair enough, there's nothing I could do. But then I got a call from Greenwich Festival, who I'd already been talking about as one of the potential partners. And I'm really happy to say, thanks to Bradley Hemmings, we found a way of bringing this back to life. So next week, Saturday and Sunday, I will have something to show at an amazing site, the Garrison Chapel in Woolwich, and keeping my fingers crossed that it will be successful. So what I want to really talk about is the fact that I've actually started rehearsals. I have 4 amazing dancers, thankfully the same 4 dancers I had before, and I've lost one. He's back in South Africa, Bulelo, but I still have my 4 dancers, and we've been having some great rehearsals. I decided with the 6 days rehearsals that I had within the budget with the dancers to actually, rather than what I might normally have done is done that in a week, I spread it over 3 weeks, because I got a sense when I was making that decision that I would need time, and I would also need to leave space for the forever changing climate of our world. I'm really glad I did that. So the first of the 3 weeks, I had just 2 half-day rehearsals with the dancers, and that was really about recapping the choreography. And then on Tuesday and yesterday, we went to our first live rehearsals. So I was in a studio for the first time this year, and it was very exciting. When the 4 dancers arrived and they stood at the English Touring Theatre Company's studios, I actually was close to tears. I just felt so emotional about about how much I had lost and how much this was so important to me and such an important part of my life. So to have those dancers there looking ready to go was the best thing ever. Thankfully, because Greenwich Festival is actually producing Black Victorians, I actually have a producer, which is something I don't always often have. It's a great luxury. So I could turn to my producer, Alison Holder, and say, what are the guidelines? Do we need to wear a mask? Don't we need to wear a mask? So she was actually checking on the guidelines for me on a daily basis, which was a really great relief. So with her looking into it, and also, of course, myself, we all agreed we could work in this extra large studio as 4 dancers without masks, few, so we could at least breathe. So at the end of the second day rehearsal yesterday, I have a piece. The next thing next week is to go to the site, because it is meant to be a site-specific piece, and to take what I have from the last 2 days rehearsals and put it onto this space, and then just see what happens. And really, that's where I'm at, a big unknown. And as well as that, in a way, that in itself, the Black Victorians, is a huge thing. But what's even bigger is a role I'm playing as part of the freelance task force. And that involves about 160 freelancers coming together as a task force and really thinking about the future of us artists, who make up 70% of our industry, freelancers, and what are we going to do? What do we need to change about pay structure, about the national portfolio organizations, the communications, what boards and what decision tables do we sit on? How can we make sure that there's a big shift there in order to protect ourselves? So there's a lot going on in my head, and I think I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
That was excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I was reflecting as you were talking about how emotional it would be to be in a studio space again. And I have to admit, I haven't had the luxury yet of being in a studio space with other dancers, but even thinking about it makes me feel a bit emotional, because I think we're as a sector a very sort of a group that enjoys being around people, enjoys that physical contact. And now with physical distancing, we don't have that. But I'm just so delighted to hear that you're able to carry out Black Victorians, and it sounds like the space that you ended up getting is phenomenal. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing how that goes. And from this perspective of the freelancers task force, I think before COVID, it was important, but now, especially in this situation, it's incredibly important. So thank you so much for your work on that and for your presentation.
Thank you.
Grand. So I'm now going to pass over to Hannah Robertshaw, and we will hear from her about her work with Yorkshire Dance. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Erin. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk today particularly about the work that Yorkshire Dance does with vulnerable groups throughout COVID and you know, and in the future. So just to start by saying, you know, we're based in Yorkshire. We champion dance development across the Yorkshire region. We do a lot of work with independent artists, supporting independent artists, and we have continued to deliver some work during this period of lockdown. Erin, if we can just move on to the next slide. So before COVID, before March, Yorkshire Dance was delivering a huge amount of participatory work on top of the development work we do with independent artists. And I've just listed some examples down the side there. So the Dance On programme, which is our partnership with One Dance UK, that we were working with over 300 older adults on a weekly basis as part of that programme, coming together across about 28 groups in the Leeds and Bradford area. A large proportion of those older adults were over the age of 70. Actually, our oldest participant on that programme is 105, so gives you some idea of the range of ages involved. We also were running 3 weekly sessions with adult social care, working with over 60 adults with a learning disability, working with 3 different residential care homes on a weekly basis. We had a team of freelance artists going and delivering full days in those residential care homes with over 50 residents. We were delivering in 3 SEN schools in Yorkshire with over 60 children, and we also had a national touring project in partnership with Tin Arts called Talent Hub, which focuses on the touring of work with artists with a learning disability and or autism. So the key considerations in some of those participant groups are just listed below there. So many of our older adults engaged in the Dance On programme have long-term health conditions. The majority, well, a large proportion of those have been shielding throughout COVID. The programme that we've been running in residential care homes is particularly focused on residents living with dementia, and also our participants with learning disabilities, and a huge range of participants in those projects with a high risk of social isolation. We can go to the next slide, Erin. So I'm sure the picture on the right hand side of the screen is familiar to you all, but that's just, it was one of our sessions that we've run online. So we began with a digital audit of our participants, recognising that a huge majority of our participants were unlikely to be online. And that took a really long time. So we noticed at the beginning of the lockdown, a lot of online activity began and was popping up. It took us a bit longer to get going because we wanted to try and speak to as many of our participants as possible. Something about being very person-centred in the approach to adapt activity. And so obviously that led to exploring lots of non-digital ways of reaching people. I'm sure things that everybody on this webinar is familiar with, but there were lots of phone calls. We designed postcards, we created activity packs, we did run outdoor sessions when it was safe to do so, some of those in parks, on doorsteps, so kind of street dancing. In care homes and sheltered accommodation, but outside in the grounds, in the garden areas. We did create a range of videos for different groups and uploaded those to YouTube. And we set up 3 weekly Zoom sessions for older adults. We actually started with 1, but the demand for those grew. So now we have 3 weekly Zoom sessions for our older adults, of which you can see one over there on the right-hand side of the screen. We also decided, and it was something that Ellie said it in relation to something else, but it applies to this as well, about not making assumptions. So we decided in relation to the work we do with older adults to try some, I guess, kind of pretty out there ideas. So we did voguing masterclasses for the over 55s. on Zoom. We invited a wonderful independent artist, Nee, who works in Yorkshire. He has led an African Zoom masterclass for our older adults. So that's been really exciting, just to kind of invite new artists in and try out some things that were perhaps combating stereotypes of what our older populations might be interested in doing. And as you can see from that screen picture on the right, lots of social engagement through those, lots of a real kind of online community building up there. We've also had, as with other partners, lots of reflection time. We've written lots of blogs and articles. We started a podcast on dementia as part of that as well. And obviously a lot of work around maintaining our key relationships with our funders, but also community partners and obviously individual participants as well. If you can go to the next slide, Erin. So in terms of returning to dance, I mean, we have a huge freelance workforce that work with Yorkshire Dance, you know, I had a long Zoom with lots of our artists yesterday who were actually saying, you know, it's not been a resting period for me. I've been working solidly throughout this lockdown to keep engaged with my groups and to keep people dancing. So the notion of returning to delivery would make some of our artists laugh, because they've been working very hard throughout the lockdown. But in terms of thinking about September, and again, September always makes me laugh. It's like this magic date that we all put in our mind, September. I mean, I don't know why September is any different to August, but I think in our the cycles of work that we do, we think of it as a new term, so it feels like a time to restart things. But we'll be adapting a mixed model approach, so part online and part in person. We'll be reducing numbers in classes to allow for social distancing, removing or minimising touch in sessions, although I'm very aware Kimberly mentioned not othering or demonising touch, and I think that's incredibly important and something that is a constant talking point for us. Our work in care homes is actually a research project exploring the impact of touch. So removing touch from that programme really compromises the research, amongst other things. We're exploring the role of volunteers within a bubble. So one of the experiences we've had working outdoors with care homes is that we can work more closely with care workers who are within a bubble with some of the residents, so that they can be more hands-on during a session than they would normally be. And that's something that we've been exploring in some of the street sessions as well, so that there is touch in sessions. It's just not touch necessarily between us and the participant, but it's kept within the bubble that participant is within. So that's something that I think is still an area to continue to explore. As with everyone, lots of additional risk assessing and implementing new health and safety measures, adapting contracts for artists and ensuring that there's clear planning for a second wave or for local lockdowns. We've had some local lockdowns here in Yorkshire, in Bradford and Calderdale and Kirklees. So that's something that we've been thinking about a lot in terms of how do we plan ahead of the curve, so that we have a way to keep people engaged and dancing during any further lockdowns that might occur nationally or more locally. And we've also, and we are planning to continue to respond to guidelines from venues and partners. As with all of you that might work in the community, the work doesn't necessarily happen within one location. We have a building at Yorkshire Dance with 3 studios, but very little of our community engagement work happens within those spaces. Most of it happens in church halls, in community centres, in day centres. So we're not just operating within the context of our own building and the health and safety in our building, but we're operating within our partners' buildings. So it's also about what they are, what guidelines they have in place to keep their participants safe. Next slide, Erin, please. So I've brought some thoughts and questions to this webinar. They're not things I necessarily have answers to, just to make that clear, but I'm just going to read these through. So community artists during COVID have been innovating and adapting or getting jobs doing other things. So some of our artists that were working within care home settings actually got work, paid work as care workers during this period. So I'm interested in how will this change or shift how artists deliver in the future? What aspects of this new way of working or new influences will artists bring to their work post-lockdown? So for example, have we sparked a new desire for delivering dance digitally? Does this enable more or less accessibility for our communities? Is it seen as a compromise or a limitation, or is it seen as a new context which we can continue to deliver in? Will we all want to walk away from our screens after this, or adapt a mixed model of community dance delivery? I think that's a really important question. A lot of people are very tired of Zoom, but there are some real benefits around bringing in new participants, but equally there are some people that Zoom is not a place that they feel comfortable or able to access dance. Next slide, Erin. This is a kind of a consideration for me because I plan a lot of artist support. So pre-COVID, community artists were often caught up in cycles of delivery, often without time to refresh or explore new things. So that concept of having a bag of tricks, which becomes the fallback in delivery. So I guess I'm asking my artists what is still relevant now, what content is possible and what is not, what CPD is needed, and what have we learned from watching or experiencing other artists during lockdown. I know lots of people have maybe been taking part in classes or accessing things that they haven't before. So what can we draw on from other people's practice that perhaps wasn't in our bag of tricks before? And what, if anything, do artists need in order to feel ready to work in their communities again? Next slide, Erin. And then this is a big question for me, and probably a big question for anyone out there working in participation, but how will communities feel about dancing together post-lockdown? Will the need be greater? Will people be more fearful? How will community artists manage and adapt to this? So at Yorkshire Dance, we've got a large proportion of our older people that are just desperate to come back together. Similarly with our young people, but it's about being in a shared space. It's not about being in an online space. So that real desire to come back, it's the social aspect as much as the dancing. So, but equally there is fear in there, particularly for anybody that has been shielding or is living with family members who are more vulnerable. So how do we manage that? How do we support and adapt to that? Next slide, Erin. And then this is again a kind of a personal interest, but what will choreography look like? Will there be lots of walking, lots of avoiding, lots of complex pathways? Will we make lots of solos, work without touch? Can we make ensembles? And was interested in Jennifer's work, is large scale ensemble work, you know, is that going to be possible? And will communities be more present or less present in the professional dance we make? So there was some wonderful work that I was involved in before COVID, which was professional work with community casts. It's work that I'm very passionate about. Will that work be possible? So it's really interesting just to think also beyond the practicalities of PPE and cleaning spaces and hand sanitizing, what actually will be the content of the dance that we are able to create with our communities. Next slide, Erin. And also, where will communities be dancing? So in lockdown, more people have met and danced outside or in new spaces or on screens. So are we craving studios again? I think from Jennifer and Erin's comments earlier, we definitely are. I know people are. But what about village halls, schools, care homes? Have we opened up new spaces that we hadn't considered before? And how does this affect the dance we can make? I'm very aware that the window for outdoor activity will close in the autumn with the beautiful British weather. So what happens then to activity that can only take place outside? Next slide, Erin. And this is also a big one. So how do we deal with loss and grief? I think it's something we should be discussing and talking about. Will dance need to become more therapeutic as a result of COVID? And I know often in dance we talk about our work being therapeutic without suggesting it's dance therapy, but it has therapeutic benefits. But will that need be greater? What about groups where many people have died? So this is a real experience that we're having within our work within care homes, where we've lost participants from our groups. That does change the dynamic of the group, it changes the need of the group, it deeply affects the artist. So how do we work within that context? And how do community artists manage the emotions of the groups they meet? How does this affect the way we dance and the dance we make? I always think community artists tread a line around between dance and social care often, and there's huge impacts on the individual artist working in with some of the more vulnerable groups we reach, and how will that affect people in the short term and the longer term? Erin, is there another slide, or have I asked all my questions? Oh, here we go, sorry. So some particular considerations for vulnerable groups that we're having. So are we looking at in-person or digital delivery, or a mixed model approach? We're recognising digital as a barrier for some of our individuals and groups. So again, really considering each participant and their needs. We're looking at suitable PPE for each group and or social distancing measures. Assessing the use of contact, including the use of props. We use a great deal of props in some of our sessions, and there's particular consideration around the use of props to keep within the COVID health and safety measures that we're putting in place. Accessing safety in and out of the studio. So I think it was Ellie that mentioned travel. So that again, that's something that we're considering. How to make things as safe as possible for people that are coming to our sessions. Understanding different spaces and partners' COVID protocols. So I mentioned community partners earlier. It's really important we work on a very bespoke level. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all in terms of a return to dance. I think it's very much working with local partners that you know, if you're working in a day centre, working with the day centre to understand what their COVID protocols are with their other groups and how does that adapt to the dance session. Understanding the needs and ambitions of groups and individuals. So we mustn't forget about ambition. We meet people on a daily basis that have hugely creative ideas and ambitions for the dance they want to make. So how do we take the time to listen and respond and work out what is possible? Enhancing roles for volunteers and supporters within a bubble during the dance session. So I mentioned that earlier. So just looking at how we can use the people that are before us that might exist within a bubble within participants, if they're able to engage with the dance session and have a desire to, what role could they take? And also deciding how much information is useful to share with our communities and in what format. So I'm very aware of all the government guidelines that change the way that we adapt and interpret those, the risk assessments that look like they go on for, 20 odd pages. What information do we need to share with our participants? And I think Ellie again said, give people the information so that they can make an informed choice. That feels incredibly important, but we need to make sure that that information is accessible. We're looking at putting things in easy read format, for example, and making sure that participants can understand what we're doing, but also what they might need to do in order to return to dance activity. I think that's probably enough from me. Lots of questions, not many answers, but thank you for having me, Erin.
No, it's my pleasure, and I feel like so many of the things that you highlighted there are things that I've heard from other people as well. So kind of the concern about the digital audit particularly, I thought was fascinating, because I've heard a lot of people worrying about their participants and whether or not they have access. But actually carrying out a digital audit, as you said, I'm sure took a lot of time. But it's the time that you invested which then would allow you to understand what sorts of activities you would be able to do or wouldn't be able to do. And I also have heard from lots of people about what learning from lockdown they're planning to keep, and what sorts of things they're going to run a mile from, like you say, from potentially from Zoom. But I completely appreciate, the last sort of 5 or 6 of your slides being questions, because I think everyone has so many questions. And the really challenging thing is that nobody knows the right answer. The medical professionals are learning, the scientists are learning, we are learning in the dance sector as artists, as creatives, as producers, as managers. And I feel that it's really important to honor the fact that everyone has questions, and we're all in this very new territory. So thank you so much for that, Hannah. That was brilliant. And we're now going to pass on to Mark Smith, the founder and director of Deaf Man Dance. And so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. There we go. Thank you, Mark.
Hello. Yes, my name is Mark Smith, and my surname is Mark with a tick. And yes, and I'm a choreographer, and I'm an artistic director of Deaf Men Dancing show, which has begun for 10 years now this year, which is fantastic. So thank you so much for having me, today, and I'm very, delighted to be invited to be part of the webinar, the discussion of a very important subject and issue that need to be brought up. So let's talk about what happened to me since the beginning of the lockdowns. Yes, I'm a freelance choreographer, and I've had many choreography projects that have been postponed or cancelled, especially the one musical that I was going to choreograph. It's called Merrily We Roll Along at Performing Arts College. It's called the London School of Musical Theatre. And unfortunately that got postponed, and me, the director of the college, trying to make it work for in autumn, but unfortunately with the social distancing and the awareness in space, it was not possible to make it work in musicals, because obviously the show did involve a lot of contact and physicality movement in the choreography. So that's really sad. So and I've had a lot of teaching work that's been cancelled, a lot of workshops and master classes at performing art colleges and the university and the schools, and that got cancelled. So and I've been last year, and I've been doing an R&D workshop on my own project. It's called Hot 8, which is it's about the life and the work about Alan Turing, who's a code breaker and who invented the father of a computer, if you like. And yeah, so it was amazing. We did a brilliant R&D last year, and this year we were ready to take it on tour, and we set up a partnership with Bletchley Park. And that's very exciting, because that's where Alan Turing works there, and that's where he helped stop the Second World War. So that's really, really important to be involved in Bletchley Park. But unfortunately, that got postponed. So fingers crossed it will happen next year, fingers crossed. And then also I was involved in R&D workshop in collaboration with Greenwich Dockland International Festival. And it's called The Lips. It is all puppeteering. It's going to be sign language, it's going to be dance and drag queens. Lovely. And and it was a collaboration with Graya Theatre Company. So, yeah, so unfortunately that got postponed, and hopefully next year. And I've been at the moment, oh yeah, the deaf men dancing. We were invited to go to Dubai, which called Expo 2020, and sadly that got postponed again. But hopefully next year, you know, they will invite deaf men dancers to perform at Dubai next year or 2020, and yeah, so, and also we did deaf men dancing performed at the Laban Theatre last year in October, and with a brand new show called Time. So, and we got a fantastic feedback, you know, from the audience who loved it. And that gave me the confidence, thinking, right, I want to apply for the funding from the Art Councils. But unfortunately, that got stopped. So, but I'm not going to give it up. So I'm going to apply for the funding, and hopefully we've already got theatres who are interested to book deaf men dancing tour, but hopefully next year or the year after. So yeah, so, and I've been keeping busy, you know, applying for funding and commission for a new project that I want to work on in the future. So that's what I've been doing at the moment. I've been thinking a lot about the future, what's my next plans, and you know, the next project in the future. So and also I've been involved in a brand new British musical. It's called The Rhythmics. It describing the musical is like the Full Monty meet Calendar Girls. So, and it's fantastic, and we've created a video to promote, you know, the new musicals, and we got fantastic feedback through Twitter, the social media. Yeah, so I'm fingers crossed. That's something. It's all about hope, really. I think that's what we all feel. It's about hope of something better in the future. So my hope is for the new musical, The Rhythmics, going to go on tour next year, and definitely dancing to come back on tour with new dancers, especially I found new dancers who are fantastic, and that's been really hard for me to see their opportunity be taken away where that been cancelled or postponed. So that's been difficult during the lockdown and the coronavirus. So yeah, so my I've been talking to a lot of deaf dancers, and about how they feel it, what they're going through, and especially with their mental health, you know, how they feel the emotion. That's been my biggest concern, is that I know that there have been so many theatres and festivals and repertoire theatre to being closed down, and even like the West End, you know, closed down, and so many performers are now out of work. So And I'm really concerned that when the theatre are open, imagine so many performers that want to do audition and be contacted the director and the producer. There are going to be so many auditions, going to be even more tougher and much more harder, especially for those who just graduate from the college, from the performing art college or universities. They are hungry for work and they want to go out and get some work. That's the first thing they want to do when they leave, when they finish their training, 3-year training. They're out there looking for work. I'm really concerned for deaf and disabled dancers who are going to be put behind. And they're like, because recently we just started to get moving to the front, and we're part of the equal opportunity and a part of a diversity, which is fantastic. But I'm just really concerned that for deaf and disabled, performers are being put back, get back in the queue now, basically. So, and that's my real concern for them, for deaf and disabled dancers, which I feel, and also I feel, during the lockdown, as a deaf person, I could speak for myself on behalf of other deaf people, is that when you're in lockdown, you're in isolation, and the communication, you have no contact, it's really difficult, and you have no, I can't use the phone to speak to anyone. And if I have to arrange a Zoom call, I will have to book an interpreter. It takes time about booking in advance. It's all about preparation. It's not just instant now. So that's what's happening for a lot of the people during the lockdown. It's a feeling of isolation and being cut off from the real world. And so I'm really concerned about when theatre and the dance are back to normal, the anxiety and the fear and the about how to get back into the real world. It's going to take time. So, and that's my concern. And also my biggest concern is the communication, where now that people are wearing masks, and I'm really worried, and I'm struggling, with people wearing masks, because I read through communication, and yeah, so especially for work, when a director or a choreographer are wearing masks in the studio space, for that dance, it's going to be really difficult not understand what that person's saying. And yeah, so, and especially in our auditions. So that's my real concerns about the communication side of it. And also with the social system, where we have to agree to be close, but we can't, we have to be apart. And that's really hard. So that real concerned about the issue regarding the coronavirus for deaf and disabled dancers. And for me at the moment, my own opinion, what will help deaf and disabled dancers is I feel that we should create a platform and a safe space, and also a support network for all deaf and disabled dancers and choreographers, where they could support each other, create like a community group, where maybe through the social media or something like that. And it would be wonderful to see a partnership, collaboration between different organisations, of a dance organisation, a disabled organisation, or deaf organisation. For example, Dance UK1, where the company, the National Deaf Children's Society, for example, and create a partnership and collaboration to support the deaf and disabled dancers and choreographers, and to give them the platform and give them the voice, and about their concern of what will work for them, what will help their future, and to help regrow again. So, and that will be after talking to many deaf dancers and disabled dancers. That's what they want, and also I think it's really important to regard it for young people, is to help with their training, especially what is accessible for them and what works for them, and regarding the sound of the space and the light and all sorts of things that is accessible for deaf and disabled dancers. And also really important to be a mentor for people who've been around for a while, a bit like me. And so for someone who can advise them and speak to them and communicate with them, and to guide them, to lead them the right direction where they need to go, and where the best training and the best class to go to that is accessible and right for their training that they need in a safe space. Yeah, so, and another thing I'm concerned about for the graduation, to people who graduate from the college. And I feel it's really important to give them a guide, and maybe some sort of like a booklet thing, a guide about where to go, and ages, or an audition, and class and workshop, dance organisation who can help them to give them a guide, because I can imagine when they, after 3 years done training, they got their diploma, when they leave college, all of a sudden, boom, it got shut on their face, and they can't, they're trapped, you know. So I think that's really important. They need this help and guidance. So that, at the moment, I mean, obviously this is a real big long discussion, you know, we could talk forever, but I'm keeping it very brief, and this is the most important thing that I feel is really important, to create a platform and a safe space, and create a community, and create a social network to support each other. And I think on the positive side of it, when we get back to normal, I know that we will be more supportive of each other, and more aware of each other, and be more kind, and be more generous. So that's what I'm hoping for. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Mark. I completely agree with and appreciate so many of the things that you said. Particularly bringing in the conversation about new graduates and young people. There are so many young people who are unable to access the things that they need now, whether that's knowledge about the industry, or opportunities for advancement, or auditions, or careers. And I think the aspect of mental health, not just for young people, but for everyone, is so, so important, because many people have been isolated, and everyone's situation is different. And with the many challenges of lockdown, one of them is we don't know each other's experience. And that's, I think, a real challenge for us, to be aware of each other and to support each other. And I agree with you entirely that I hope we are, as a sector and as a group of human beings, more supportive of each other in light of everything we've experienced. And I also have to say that it really touched me when you were talking about platforms and partnerships to support deaf and disabled dancers. There is a definite need for there to be more direct support and more community and connection for dancers who are deaf and disabled. And I certainly feel very passionate, and I know there are many people in many organizations who feel very passionate about that. It's just about making the steps towards those partnerships and making the opportunities and resources available. So thank you so much for your comments. I hugely appreciate them.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we'll be moving now on to Sophie Tickle. And Sophie is the lead artist at Dance Syndrome.
Hello everyone, so I'm Sophie, and as Erin said, I work with Dance Syndrome. So for those of you who haven't heard of Dance Syndrome before, we are an inclusive organisation, and we are based in Lancashire. So we are a disability-led organisation, and we work with a model of co-leadership. So all our workshops are co-delivered by a dance artist and a dancer with a disability. So we run a training programme, and we train in a co-delivery model, and then we run community workshops, and we also have a performance company too. So from March, obviously like everyone else, we find ourselves in a situation where we couldn't obviously deliver face-to-face activity anymore. So our main objective was to find a way to engage our participants and in different ways in order to maintain social interaction, because a lot of our participants, as others have said, face that risk of social isolation, and we just didn't want that to happen. So like Hannah and Ellie and Kimberly said, communication was just key for us, and we did a lot of consultation. So we spoke to our families, and we spoke to our community partners, and we spoke to our dancers, we spoke to our freelance artists, and we just tried to figure out what would maybe work best. But like everyone, we kind of knew we were working in a very grey area. We hadn't really experienced anything like this before, so we were just trying to find our feet really, and essentially just do what we thought might be best. So essentially we set up some digital activity. So we did some pre-recorded sessions on YouTube, we set up Zoom sessions. Then we also tried to interact with those who we knew couldn't access digital platforms. So we stayed in contact on the phone. We set creative tasks through WhatsApp groups with our performance company and things like that, so that we tried to find as many different ways of engaging people as possible. And obviously working in a digital platform, that brought up lots of things to do with safeguarding and creating risk assessments, as people have mentioned, and just figuring out what was right and what was best. And obviously I think essentially you're trying your best, but with government guidelines changing, you are just kind of feeling your way through and hoping that something might work. So I think in terms of the work that we've done, we have just started to introduce some outdoor sessions, and we're looking to a return to dance in the autumn. And obviously the key considerations that have been mentioned are at the forefront of our mind too, but just trying to keep quite a brief kind of conversation. I know we're slightly over time as well, but I think from observing our groups that we've worked with outdoors, Dance syndrome really advocate the importance of the individual and allowing everyone's voices to be heard. And what I've really noticed is that there's almost kind of been two camps as we've returned. So we've got those who kind of just can't stop talking and are kind of almost taken over the sessions to the point where you can't actually progress with the dance activity because they just want to talk, and you know that for some of those people they have had very little social interaction during lockdown. That's been quite limited for them, and so that's really important, and for them to have that voice and to be in that setting, that's really important. But then on the other kind of scale of the spectrum, we've got people who are usually confident, usually kind of really open and willing and kind of generous with their offerings, and who maybe aren't the loudest people, but they are really willing to contribute, who have just really seemed to sink back into the shells. And so a question for me has been, how do you kind of manage that within a session? So if you're limited to time, obviously you will be. With smaller groups, your time might change. You might have smaller sessions with smaller numbers. How do you ensure that everyone's voices are heard when you're really trying to give opportunity for people who've maybe not had much social interaction to have to say and speak and to contribute? But then how do you nurture those who have really sunk back into the shells and give them a voice and a platform too? And that could be creatively, that could just be thinking really to the art form and thinking about kind of offering creative activities where their voices can start to come back gently. Whilst kind of at the other end of the scale again, ensuring that those with the louder voices don't dominate the session and suppress the others. And so obviously again, I'm not sure the answer to that, and that's a question that we're going to be kind of really figuring out as we go along and as we work through the next couple of months. But I just thought it was a really interesting thing to think about, and especially for us just to kind of to be thinking about how we might answer and how we might navigate that in the coming months. So thank you so much for One Dance UK for having us, and I'll hand back to Erin. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was a fascinating insight as well. I think some of the things that really stood out to me from what you were saying is the different responses that you're getting from different people in your sessions. And I've certainly experienced that as well, that there are some people who are kind of coming back into their shells as a result of the past few months. And then there are some people who have really found their voices and are really engaging more and more actively than they had in the past. And it's really interesting to notice those changes and how our environments have affected us and potentially changed the way that we're thinking about things. And I think it is really important, and I think Kimberly said this as well, that we need to be aware of those responses and sensitive to the responses that different people have to this situation. And I really appreciate as well that you're committed to hearing all of those voices and trying to engage with them at whatever level they might be at. And that's fabulous. And so I would like to invite everyone on the panel to start their videos again. And we'll have an opportunity now, if anyone in the attendee group would like to ask any questions of the panelists, please feel free to put those into the Q&A box, and we can address any questions that anyone has. To start off with, I actually wanted to ask a question of my own, if that's all right. I'm quite keen to hear from each of you about your sort of personal thoughts on how this next, say, 3 to 6 months, so through to the end of the year and a little bit beyond that, is going to feel and look for you. Yeah, Hannah.
I think in terms of Yorkshire Dance and my role at Yorkshire Dance, I think it's going to be adopting a sort of test and learn approach. So we are resuming some activity for every class that's held. There'll be learning from that class that we can share. We are expecting artists back in the studio making work. I think it's going to be baby steps and finding out what's working and what's not working. I mean, just this week we've made some calls on our participatory work with young people, so not returning the 0 to 4-year-olds that we work with, but returning 5 and up, because there's some measures around the building that we just think those younger children, we can't guarantee how that will work yet for them. So it's kind of bringing things in slowly. Again, going back to what I think we've all talked about, which is not adopting a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to returning. I think a lot of the work that we do in community settings will be a staggered start, so I'm expecting lots of working very closely at a grassroots level with community partners to work out when things can restart and what that might look like. Anything that involves theatres and touring, I think we're still waiting on more understanding of how that might look in terms of returning performance work. I think it's slow steps. We're trying to do a lot of networking events and things just for our kind of our artist community in Yorkshire, just to share, because I think that there's expertise in little pockets, and it's not solely about organisations leading. It's about the independent artists and the freelancers leading and learning and sharing back, and so much more communication, much more networking, and openness to kind of adapting and changing things, albeit we have the biggest amount of risk assessments I've ever seen in my life at the moment. But just being flexible and adaptable. Care home work, anyone that's working in care homes that's on this webinar, I think that is a whole other ball game and needs a whole other conversation, because I think care homes are still in crisis, and I think that work will be very difficult to return to some of those very, very vulnerable participants who are still not allowed family, often not allowed family and friends to visit inside the care home. So the expectation that dancers are going to be allowed in to work with participant groups, I think we need to be realistic and keep talking to the care home partners about when is the most appropriate time, albeit we recognise that there's a huge need to bring, joyful, connective moments into those spaces.
Kimberly, sure.
I think for me, these next sort of few months was always going to be a process of discovery and building. But maybe the discovery and building looks slightly different to what I thought it was originally going to be. And actually, there's going to be a lot more, there's going to need to be, as Hannah said as well, there's going to be a lot more preparation in ways that we haven't done before, or in different kinds of ways, or in addition to what we already did. So I think it's just the breadth of the areas that we're covering has widened. So I think there's just taking the time to try and consider all the options, whilst also keeping those channels of communication as open as possible in as much of a variety of ways as possible as well.
I guess when my production is finished at the end of August and I go into September right through to next March, actually in reality that's normal for me, that the actual large majority of my work has gone quiet, and it's usually my time for networking. Hello, how are you? Let's chat, and sort of building relationships for what might look next year might look like. So actually the next 6 months from about September to probably beginning of the year will be normal, but it would be in very strange times. So it is a big unknown. But what I do know, just doing the Black Victorians, is that as a freelancer, I really feel alone and isolated. And I'm going to rely on having a relationship with organisations and continuing dialogue with Greenwich Festival, who's supporting this project. I'm going to need that more than ever before to know what's going on. Otherwise, it's just a very lonely world. Keeping my fingers crossed and being hopeful.
I think for us, again, it's an opportunity to kind of find out and explore, but it's also about looking at how we can work with partners in different ways. So instead of having maybe all of our participants come to us, come to a building, come to a setting, look at how we can use maybe digital media to kind of take our artists into specific groups that we work with, or look at alternative ways to work with partners. So yeah, I think that's going to be our navigation process.
Just to add from what Kimberly was saying, for Canduco, it's about, and Hannah was saying, testing and learning and planning and replanning. I think I've never done so many plans and scenario plans, A, B, C, D, E, F, plus the risk assessments that go alongside that. So I think we're all in kind of new territory, and we'll just be seeing how it goes and needing to be super adaptive and responsible as things pop up that we weren't expecting.
Mark, yeah. Oh, sorry, Mark, I think you need to unmute. There we go.
Working now. So, yes. For me, before the lockdown, I remember feeling very overwhelmed with so many work and everything was getting on top. It was becoming quite chaos. So, when the lockdown happened, for me, it was kind of like, okay, it's time to breathe and start reflecting and looking back, and how do I start fresh again, and what the best way for the future. So it kind of like a pause moment for me. So, and how to make it accessible and work for deaf and disabled dancers in the future, especially for deaf men dancing. So, so I've just been keeping busy for 6 months by rebranding, start new, fresh. So, and also I've started to explore more on digital, dance and through online. And that's completely new to me. So, and so I've had to learn to adapt to the new way of working, new way of choreographing. For example, when I choreographed the rhythmic new musical for their video promo, and we all had to rehearse through Zoom like this. And so it was a very new way of choreographing, especially when I say use right arm, I have to tell them to use your left, describing right shoulder or head. It is all like the coordination. It was like that an alien to me of way of teaching and choreography was so different. So, but on a positive side of it, it's about learning to adapt in different way of working, because it could be the future.
Brilliant. Thank you all for that. I'm aware of the time, and we did have one question in the Q&A box, and I think we should address it before we go into the open space, for everyone to sort of have a discussion together. But the question is, how do we regain confidence in vulnerable participants in returning to dance? What exercises or themes can we do in those initial classes? And I'm going to do a little bit of a challenge here for the panel. I would like for you to think about one exercise, theme, or strategy that you might be using to help sort of regain confidence and help people in your settings, and maybe even you regain confidence? Shall we start with Sophie this time?
I think it's a really difficult one, and I don't think I think there's so many different possibilities. But one thing I always find for us and our dancers is music as a starting point or as a driving point. So it could be kind of basing an exercise or a class around different participants choosing a piece of music that makes them feel happy or makes them feel powerful or makes them feel confident, and then kind of either looking at kind of some freestyle exercises around that, or maybe some kind of set work that you can create, but using music as a starting point, I think, just has this universal ability to kind of increase confidence and to kind of I suppose release some happy hormones and things like that to hopefully go some way to build some confidence.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sophie. And shall we go to Ellie now?
I'm not a dance practitioner, so apologies for my answer, and I will default to Kimberly in a second. But I will say that I suppose some of the themes that Kimberly and I have been chatting about is how can we use kind of experiences that the young people have been having during lockdown and coming out of lockdown as material for exploring within some of our sessions. So how can we sort of make it really focused in the now and hear, you know, voices and experiences and share stories of where people have been and what's been happening to them, so that it's really kind of grounded in the present and that we're not coming in with something that feels maybe more abstract or from a different time. So I don't know if that will necessarily instill confidence, but I hope that that gives us kind of space to explore people's kind of personal stories and relationships with their experiences during COVID. But potentially Kimberly has some better answers.
That was a lovely answer. Kimberly, shall we hear from you?
I think to follow on from what Ellie said, particularly in the online setting, I think it's really important to bring the individuals in and to hear from them, and then also to establish how we create that group identity and on this platform initially. So it's finding ways of sharing movement, maybe literally. So even things of just creating a group identity through a movement conversation that we would do every session as a way of saying hello. And maybe then this is what continues for a while if we do get into the live setting as well. So that there is some crossover. And also I'm aware that if we do venture into the live world at some point, as in face-to-face, how do we connect with the people that maybe were here with us on Zoom but now aren't there? So is there a way of bringing the Zoom session potentially into the studio as well, so there's a chance for individuals to see and dance with each other, even if it still is virtual?
Yeah, that's a question I have as well. Thank you, Kimberly. That's excellent. Shall we go to Jennifer?
I suppose in this time, what I'm realising on reflection is that whilst a lot of my work is professional productions with community groups, I don't have a community group of my own, so I don't get to talk to a group of participants and to talk about this process. So I guess how I would really want to start is the way I've often worked, which is recognising the power of the work the community group leaders do, and just talking to some of the leaders such as Hakeem running Impact and the work he's doing with young people, and Greenwich Dance, who's really getting their artists to connect with their community. I guess I would want to work with the community group leaders first. And perhaps it's together we create something online that their participants work on, and then we take it to the studio, but almost use that whole process as problem solving together. So they're arriving at studio and there's a grid and everyone stands in their spot, but it's something they've already seen online. So we start imagining mass participation in a very different way. but as in a lot of my work, they are part of that creative process. So I think that is, yeah, that would be the way for me.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jennifer. And Hannah?
Thanks, Erin. I think the first thing to say is I don't think we should assume a lack of confidence. So that feels really important. I think many of our groups that I know don't feel underconfident about coming back. It's us that feels more cautious on their behalf. So I think that's firstly something to recognise. I have a real concern on themes in dance generally, but particularly post-COVID. So I'm imagining that lots of youth dance, for example, might assume themes around isolation and being alone, and you know, and I think everything might get quite heavy and quite. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily start in that place. I'm not sure it's that helpful, although for some people maybe it will be. I am a real advocate on social time before and after sessions. I know it's not always possible, but I think where you can have conversation and chat, and certainly with our work with older people, there is a cup of tea moments, there is you know, social side where we can do things outside of the dance that can be much more around individuals' concerns, that is then not brought into the dance space, as it were. And I also, just two other points, as a kind of movement play specialist, I really advocate play and game playing, and in terms of practice. So I would encourage groups to find their playfulness and also enjoy space, because we have all been in relative, I don't know if anyone in the dance sector lives in a mansion, but I certainly don't. I live in quite a small house, and just the opportunity to be in a space where you can extend your arms and your body and, you know, enjoy taking up space. So I think for a lot of our participants, that will be something that's really wonderful to experience. So I hope that that makes coming back to dance a joyful, you know, joyful experience, and not one that's fueled with fear. So yeah, I'm not sure I have any particular like games or tasks to suggest right now, but I'm very happy to chat with people afterwards about what those things might be. But let's not make assumptions that everybody is fearful.
Thank you. And Mark?
For me, I feel we should be open to creativity and without any judgmental. So I think no matter what their background, their levels, and show people to be really creative in dance. You could be using a language, you could be using any patterns or shapes or colors or anything, or yeah, music that inspires them, things like that. I think that would be really nice to have, to help them gain confidence to be creative and be open and sharing, and encourage people to embrace dance in a fun way. And yeah, so I think that what I could see will help gain the confidence.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to stay in this Zoom space. I had previously thought that we might move, but given the participant group that we have, we're going to stay in this Zoom space. Anyone who needs to depart now, if you're not able to stay for the next bit of this session, which is a sort of open space for discussion, please feel free to do so now. That's absolutely fine. And thank you so much for your time today.